Montana Territory, June 1878. The wind carried smoke, and the sharp scent of scorched pine as Kade Whitlow rode hard into the valley, rifle strapped to his back. Dust caked on his boots, and one clear thought in his mind: find her before the flames did. He had not seen Zadie North in almost 2 years, not since she vanished with her 2 children and whatever was left of her pride after her husband left her for dead in a mining town just south of Bannack. Folks said she'd gone up toward the Bitterroots to find quiet, maybe safety. But now half the forest was burning, and Kade had heard through an old trapper that a homestead in the draw was still standing, and inside it, a woman fighting for her life and refusing to leave. He crested the ridge and saw it. A small cabin with a leaky roof and a garden patch turned to ash. Smoke curled low over the clearing, and there she was standing at the edge of the porch, a shotgun in one hand, her face streaked with soot, her long dark braid hanging heavy down her back. Her daughter clung to her skirts. Her son stood barefoot in the dirt, holding a rusted tin bucket of water like it might keep the whole world from burning. "Zadie," Kade shouted as he slid off his horse. She spun, eyes wide, disbelief slamming into her features. "Kade, you need to get out of here," he said, already moving toward her. "The fire's less than a mile off. You will not outrun it on foot." "I am not leaving," she barked, stepping between him and the children. "Not without my land. Not without everything I built." He looked at her, really looked, and his chest ached. She was thinner than he remembered, shoulders sharper, eyes harder, but she was still Zadie. The same girl who used to chase wild calves with him across his father's ranch when they were kids. The same woman he had loved in silence while she married a man who broke her. "I will carry you out if I have to," he said, voice low. "You're wasting your life on me," she snapped. "Then it's a life well spent," he said, and meant every word. She stared at him, blinking fast, lips parting like she might argue again, but her daughter coughed behind her, a raw, wheezing sound that cut through the heat like a blade. Zadie turned. "Vera," she whispered, kneeling beside the girl. "You all right?" The girl was maybe 6, hair tangled, dressed too small. Kade crouched beside them, reaching out to press his palm to the girl's forehead. "She's breathing in too much smoke." Zadie nodded once, jaw clenched. "Fine, we go." Kade moved fast. He threw what supplies he could into saddlebags, lifted Zadie onto his horse, then hoisted Vera in front of her. He took Valor, Zadie's 8-year-old son, onto his own saddle. The boy did not speak, just clung to the horn with white knuckles and wide eyes. They rode hard, the roar of fire behind them, heat licking at their backs. Kade knew the land like the lines of his own hand. He took a narrow game trail down into a rocky ravine where the fire would not follow. They reached the river by dusk, lungs burning, clothes damp with sweat. Zadie slid off the horse with shaking legs and grabbed both children tight against her. Kade watched her, heart thumping, dirt streaked on his face, the weight of everything they had just survived sinking deep into his bones. She looked up at him. "Why did you come?" he shrugged. "Heard you were in trouble." "There's 100 people in trouble," she said. "I only cared about one." Zadie stared at him for a long time, then she sat down beside the fire he built, pulled Vera into her lap, and said nothing. That night under the stars, Kade sat watch while the children slept. Zadie sat across from him, arms around her knees. "You really would have carried me out?" she asked in a heartbeat. "I would have fought you. I know." She gave a small laugh, tired and dry. "You always were stubborn," he tilted his head. "Only about the things that mattered." She looked at him, and something soft passed between them, something old and aching, something that had never really gone away. "I thought I was done with people," she said. "After him, after everything. I thought I could raise them quiet and alone." "You do not have to be alone anymore," he said. Zadie looked down at her hands. "You do not know what it is like being left, being used up, being told you are no good for anything but bearing children and cooking beans." "I know you," Kade said. "That is enough." Her eyes flickered up to his again. This time she did not look away. They stayed by the river for 2 nights, letting the worst of the smoke pass. Kade helped Valor build a slingshot from river reeds. He taught Vera how to skip stones. Zadie watched them from a fallen log, arms crossed, but her mouth twitched at the corners when Vera shouted, "3 skips." On the third morning, Kade saddled the horses and turned to her. "I have a place. West of Deer Lodge, not much, but it is safe, water's good, barns standing. You and the kids could come." Zadie hesitated. "You sure?" "I am offering," she glanced at her children. "What if I am not ready for anything? I will wait," he said, and he meant it. She looked at him a long time, then nodded. "All right. We will come." He helped her onto the horse again. Vera curled against her chest, Valor riding close beside them. As they rode west, Kade glanced over and saw the way Zadie's fingers curled into the mane, how she tilted her head toward her daughter's hair, breathing her in like she could not believe they were still whole. He reached over and took her hand. She let him, did not pull away. Whatever came next, he knew one thing for certain: he would never leave her. Not again. Not ever. The trail followed the river until it narrowed into a draw hemmed in by cottonwoods and low, leaning rock. By the time they reached Kade's homestead, the sun sat heavy behind the peaks, giving the hills a bruised sort of light. The cabin stood just above a slope thick with bunchgrass, a low-slung structure of hewn logs and a sod roof gone gold with dry moss. A split-rail fence ran crooked around a patch of earth where a few rows of corn had started up from the dirt. Zadie dismounted slow, her skirts stiff from ash and travel. Vera clung to her hip, her cheek pressed against Zadie's shoulder, while Valor slid off the saddle by himself and stood staring at the place, silent as ever. "You've been living here?" Zadie asked, adjusting her grip on her daughter. 5 years, Kade said, leading the horses toward the small lean-to barn. "Built it after my brother passed. Didn't want town life anymore." She glanced toward the cabin. "It's quiet." That was the point. Inside, the air smelled of pine resin and old tobacco. A single room, swept clean, with a narrow bed tucked against the far wall and a stone hearth blackened from years of use. An iron cookstove squatted near the entrance, the stovepipe cutting through the roof at a slant. Kade set down a crate of dried beans and salt pork beside the wood box. "I'll sleep in the barn for a spell," he said, pulling off his hat. "You and the young ones take the bed." Zadie frowned. "You don't have to, I do," he said, not unkindly. "It's not right otherwise." She watched him remove his boots, moving deliberate like he was working around something fragile. "You don't talk like most men," she said. "They're all noise and show." He looked up, one brow lifting. "Maybe I never liked how most men turn out." She leaned against the wall, Vera now curled up on the mattress, her thumb in her mouth. "Did you ever marry?" "No." "Why not?" He hesitated, gaze drifting toward the fire pit. "Never met anyone I wanted to build a life with." "Not until now." Zadie looked away, her arms folding over her chest. "You don't know me anymore. I remember enough to trust what kind of woman you are. I've changed. So have I." Outside, night fell slow and wide, the sound of crickets rising in the hush. She lit a lantern, the flame catching in the curve of the glass, and her face softened in the glow. Kade watched her tuck Valor in beside his sister, the way her hand lingered at the back of his head, like touching him was the only way to believe he was still safe. He stepped outside, giving her space, and sat beneath the awning of the barn. The sky stretched endless above him, stars just beginning to show. He heard the door open behind him, footsteps careful against the dry ground. "You don't owe us anything," she said quietly, standing beside him. "You could have left us back there." "I didn't want to," he answered. She looked out toward the ridgeline. "I keep wondering what I'm supposed to do now. I don't know where to start." "You already did," he said. "You got them out. You kept them breathing. But everything I worked for's gone." He stood, brushing hay from his trousers. "Then we build something new." She tilted her head, examining him. "And you do that for me, I'd do it with you." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she sat down on the edge of the trough, her hands in her lap. The silence stretched, but it wasn't sharp. It held something softer now, a kind of settling. "You rode through fire for me," she said. "I'd do it again." She nodded, almost to herself. "I don't know what to make of you." "You don't have to make anything yet," he said. "Just rest." As she stood to return inside, she paused at the threshold. "You said you'd wait." "I will." She touched the door frame, eyes on the wood grain. "Maybe I won't make you wait forever." Then she was gone. Kade stayed outside until the lantern flickered out. When he finally lay down in the hayloft, the night was cool and still, and for the first time in a long while, he let himself believe he wasn't alone in the world. Morning came cool and gray, the kind of sky that promised rain but held back. Zadie stood at the edge of the lean garden, sleeves rolled, Vera on her hip and Valor crouched by her feet, poking at the soil with a stick. Kade had left before dawn to check the trap lines along the creek, but not before laying out his tools beneath the porch and marking a place for the children to avoid the hatchet blade had gone dull, and he didn't want small hands near it. Vera tugged at Zadie's dress collar. "Mama, can we stay here forever?" Zadie looked down at her daughter's round face, eyes still red rimmed from the smoke days before. "I don't know about forever," she said, brushing a bit of hair from the girl's cheek, "but we'll stay a while." She hadn't decided yet what that truly meant. But the ground here was soft enough to turn and the air was clean. That counted for something. Valor stood. "He said we could plant squash, said that dirt's ready." Zadie nodded. "Then we'll plant it." She set Vera down and the three of them worked in silence for a while, hands in the earth, the rhythm of it steadying. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, its cry sharp against the hush. Later, Kade returned with 2 rabbits slung over his shoulder and a furrow to his brow. He didn't speak at first, just nodded at the children and handed off one of the carcasses to Valor, showing him where to hold it while he cleaned the other. Zadie watched from the doorway. "Something wrong," he wiped his hands on a rag. "Found wagon tracks heading north, deep enough to be recent." "Not settlers." "Then who?" "Could be trappers, could be someone looking for what's left after the fire." Zadie stepped down from the stoop. "You think they'll come this way? Doubt it, but I'll keep an eye out." She glanced toward the ridge, her voice low. "I don't want trouble. No one in their right mind does. You've been out here alone long enough to know what kind of men come looking for what isn't theirs." "I've handled worse," he said, "and you're not alone anymore." She looked at him then, really looked. His face was sun-darkened, lines around his mouth deeper than she remembered, a scar she hadn't seen before just under his right ear. But his eyes they held. "You trust too easy," she said. "I don't," he replied. "I trust you, that's different." She shook her head, more at herself than him. "I used to think that kind of trust was foolish." "Still might be," he said with a half shrug. "But I'm not the kind of man who walks away from what he cares about." That evening, after supper, Valor fell asleep in front of the hearth, a quilt tucked under his chin. Vera curled at his side, her breath slow and even. Zadie sat on the porch steps, arms looped around her knees, watching the last light fade behind the hills. Kade joined her, a tin cup of coffee in his hands. "You always this quiet when things are good?" she asked. "I talk more when things go bad." "But I don't have much to add right now." She leaned her shoulder against the post. "You ever think about leaving Montana?" He took a sip before answering. "Once, after my brother died, thought maybe I'd head south, Texas maybe, but I didn't get far. Couldn't see myself starting over where nothing made sense." "You think this makes sense?" He looked out over the field where the corn stalks moved in the wind. "I think what we're doing here feels like something real." She traced a knot in the wood with her fingertip. "I can't offer much." "Not now, not for a while." "I'm not asking for anything," he said. "I know, that's the part I don't understand." He turned toward her, setting the cup down on the step. "You told me I was wasting my life on you." She looked away, embarrassed. "I remember." "Well," he said, voice low, "then it's a life well spent." Her throat tightened. She didn't speak. After a while, he stood and offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it. Inside, she laid beside her children, listening to them breathe. The cabin was still. Rain began to fall, slow and steady, tapping the roof like a lullaby. And for the first time in what felt like years, she didn't dream of fire. The rain held for 3 days, soft and steady, soaking into the fields and darkening the logs of the cabin. Kade spent most of that stretch beneath the lean-to, whittling fence posts and sharpening blades dulled by weeks of use. Zadie kept the children close, teaching Vera to stitch a straight seam and showing Valor how to shape dough without wasting flour. The rhythm of it was slow, but it filled the hours without ache. By the fourth morning, the clouds broke open to a clean blue sky and Kade saddled the mule. He traded for it 2 springs back a gray, slow-footed mare that didn't care for company but hauled weight without complaint. He packed the panniers with potatoes and smoked meat, tied a bundle of hides to the back and checked the cinch twice. Zadie stood near the porch, drying her hands on her apron. "You heading to town? Need salt and lamp oil." "Might see if the mail wagon brought anything useful," she nodded, eyes flicking toward the ridge. "Watch for that wagon trail you mentioned." "Already planned to." He stepped up, pausing. "You want anything brought back?" She hesitated, then said, "A slate if they've got one." "Vera's near ready for her letters." "I'll see what I can find." Kade mounted the mule, adjusted his hat and rode out slow, giving her time to call him back if she changed her mind. She didn't. The children played near the creek that afternoon, stacking smooth stones into towers and sending dry leaves floating downstream. Zadie worked with a heavy needle at the table, mending a tear in Kade's coat where a thread had split clean along the seam. She didn't ask why she was doing it. Her hands just moved. By dusk, the children were asleep, and she sat on the edge of the porch, watching the stars return. She didn't hear the horse until it was almost at the fence line. She stood, hand at her side, not reaching for the rifle but not relaxed either. The man who rode up was rangy and pale, with a crooked nose and a hat pulled low. He didn't smile. "You Kade Whitlow's woman?" he asked, voice dry as dust. She stepped down a single stair. "He's not here." "Didn't ask where he was. I asked if you were his." She didn't answer. He leaned forward in the saddle. "He took something off a man named Corman up near the pass. That mean anything to you?" "No." "Well, Corman's looking to settle up, wants Whitlow to know he's coming." Zadie squared her shoulders. "Then you've said what you came to say." The man laughed, a short, sharp sound. "You don't look like much trouble. Maybe he figured you'd be easy to lean on. You came to the wrong place if you think that." He looked her over once more, then turned his horse and rode off without another word. She didn't sleep that night, not fully. She kept the rifle near the door and her boots beside the bed. The children never stirred. Kade returned late the next evening, dust-covered and silent. She met him as he stepped down from the saddle, his eyes already on her face. "Someone came," she said. He nodded once. "I passed him on the road. You know this Corman, used to ride with him years back before I left the cattle cruise." "Why's he looking for you?" "He stole from a family near Fort Owen, claimed they owed him. I wrote him off, took back what he'd taken." She crossed her arms. "He says he's coming, I know." "What are you going to do?" Kade looked toward the hills, jaw tight. "I'll finish it before it reaches here." "No," she said, "you won't." His gaze snapped back. "Zadie, you think I've spent years clawing out a place for my children just to hide behind someone else when danger shows up on a horse? No, you don't go out there alone." His voice stayed level. "I won't let them near the house." "They won't get near the house," she said. "Because we'll be ready." He watched her, something shifting behind his expression, something she couldn't quite name. "I brought the slate," he said quietly, "and a tin of peppermint drops. I'll see she gets it." He reached into the saddlebag and handed it over. She took it, fingers brushing his. "I'll sit with the rifle tonight," she said. "I already planned to." They stood together in the last light, neither moving. The air smelled of wet pine and wood smoke, and somewhere in the dark, an owl called low from the trees. He said, "You're not what I expected." She looked at him, steady. "You're not either." This time he didn't ask her to rest, and she didn't ask him to wait. They sat together just inside the door, rifles across their knees, her shoulder resting against his. When dawn finally broke, pale and cold across the land, they were still there, awake, unshaken, and side by side. 2 nights passed with no sign of Corman or his men. The land, soaked from the rains, breathed back into itself, and the air took on the scent of thawing soil and pine sap. Zadie spent the afternoons gathering whatever remained of the early spring shoots along the slope behind the cabin. keeping Vera within earshot and Valor within sight. Kade checked the ridges daily, rifle across his back, his movements quiet and deliberate. On the third morning, Valor came running from the edge of the pasture, boots wet with dew and breath hitching. "There's a man at the fence," he said, voice tight. "Alone." Kade stepped out without a word, rifle already in hand. Zadie followed, keeping Vera behind her. The man standing at the far gate held his hat in his hands, head tilted slightly. He was older than Corman, with a face wind-worn and eyes dulled by something long settled. "I'm not here for a fight," he said as Kade approached. "Name's Elgin. Corman sent me ahead. Said to give you a chance to talk before he rode in." Kade didn't lower the rifle. "He's not one for talking." Elgin nodded slowly. "He's not, but he's older now, slower, doesn't much fancy dying over a grudge." Zadie stepped up beside Kade. "And what does he want?" "Wants to be square. Said if you give back the money you took off him, he'll leave it alone." Kade didn't flinch. "That family's still alive, there in Missoula. I saw the boy not 2 months ago. He walks with a limp, but he's working the livery. Then the money stays with them." Elgin let out a long breath. "Didn't figure you'd give it back, but I had to ask. You done now?" "I am." Kade watched him mount and ride off, slow and stiff in the saddle. Then he turned to Zadie. "That was the last of it," he said. "Corman won't ride this far for nothing." She studied his face. "You sure?" "I know the man. He sent Elgin because he's not strong enough to ride this ridge himself." Zadie nodded once, then turned to go back inside. That evening, as the wind shifted warm for the first time in weeks, she sat near the stove watching the children draw pictures in the dirt with charcoal ends. Vera hummed under her breath, and Valor crouched beside her, utterly focused. "You ever think about marrying again?" she asked Kade, quiet enough that only he could hear. He looked up from the table where he was binding together a new hinge for the barn door. "I did." She turned toward him. And he set the leather strap aside. "I only thought about it once." Zadie didn't smile, but her voice softened. "Were you waiting to ask me?" "I was waiting for you to be ready." She stood, smoothing her dress, then walked over to where he sat. She didn't kneel, didn't put on softness to make her words easier. She just looked him in the eyes. "I ain't got much left to give a man. I'm tired, and I get sharp sometimes when I'm scared. I know. My children come first, they always will." She took a breath. "But if I'm going to build again, I want it with someone who's already stood beside me when things were ugly." He reached out and took her hand. "Then let's build something." She nodded once, then leaned her brow to his. They married beneath the cottonwood at the edge of the field the following Sunday. Zadie wore her best dress, the hem repaired with careful stitches. Vera carried a small bunch of wildflowers, and Valor stood tall beside Kade, his hair combed for the first time in weeks. The preacher from Deer Lodge rode out for the service, and afterward they shared a meal of rabbit stew, fresh cornbread, and the last jar of blackberry preserves from the root cellar. No one spoke of the past. There was no need. In the months that followed, Zadie planted a new garden, this one closer to the house and better protected from the wind. She taught Vera her letters on the slate Kade had brought, and Valor took to building things small traps, a shelf for the storeroom, a stool that never quite stopped wobbling. Kade built a second room onto the cabin, then a loft for the children. He never raised his voice, and he never left without saying he'd be back. They slept beside each other every night, her back to his chest, his arm draped over her waist. Sometimes, in the hours before dawn, she'd wake to find his hand curled in hers, even in sleep. By the end of the year, the fields were green again, and the fences stood straight from corner to corner. Travelers passed now and then, but no one came looking for trouble. Corman never returned. One morning in early April, Zadie stepped out onto the porch, a hand at her belly, warm with new life. Kade looked up from his work by the fence, saw her smile, and crossed the field without hesitation. "Well," he said, brushing dirt from his hands, "I reckon we'll need another cradle." She leaned into him, her voice low. "And another set of hands come harvest. We'll manage." She looked over her shoulder at the children chasing each other in the grass, their laughter bright in the morning air. "I think we already are." They stood there a while, the wind soft through the trees, spring blooming wild around them, and in that stillness, wrapped in the quiet certainty of shared life, they didn't need to say another word.